everybody, and welcome back to another episode of The Outside Noise. I am your host today, Taylor Hodges with HottyToddy.com, and it was a pretty good weekend for Ole Miss baseball. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, series sweep. Anytime you sweep a SEC team, it's got to be a good weekend. Though in the fact that it was LSU, the team that has that growing rivalry that's kind of started over in football, and now it's kind of spread a little bit into the women's basketball. Now maybe a little bit into the baseball and all the other sports. So yeah, got to be happy about that. And throw in some of the things that we saw. We saw a few good things to talk about, and so that's what we're gonna do today. So yeah, let's get into it. All right, so let's just start off just overall thoughts in terms of, what does the series sweep mean? Where does it put Ole Miss in terms of the standings? And, well, in terms of I guess if we start with the perception of Ole Miss after sweeping LSU, it's obviously better. They showed some of the things that they had been struggling with in terms of like situational hitting and, how they perform at the plate with runners in scoring position, 2 outs, all those types of things. Was it perfect? No, but it never is in baseball. So it was good to see them come through in some of those moments, and then also see some of the, not necessarily your big name players like a Judd Udom or Tristan Becerra, have some really good weekends at the plate. So which we'll get into here in a minute. But I think overall, Ole Miss has just kind of, reasserted itself kind of in that upper middle tier of the SEC. And what I mean by that is if you go and look at the SEC standings, you'll see there's, Georgia's at the top with 11 wins. And then from like 7 wins to 9 wins, there's 12 or 13 teams. And, Ole Miss is in the 8-win, it's 8-7 in the SEC, so that puts them in that upper half of that little large cluster of teams. And fun fact, it's actually ahead of Mississippi State. So there's another little feather in the cap for the Rebel fans out there. And I mean, it's really going to be an interesting month to see what happens in the SEC, because you're starting to see, okay, Georgia just swept Mississippi State, but then it loses its series. I believe it was to Arkansas. We'll double check that. And then you got Texas A&M beating Texas twice. And then, Kentucky beating Auburn. Tennessee sweeping Mississippi State. It's just kind of one of those, it's going to be a very interesting month to see what happens and see where the Rebels land amongst all of that cluster of parity and everything. But, so, let's move on. Okay, so next I want to start kind of doing something that's kind of, I know it's definitely in hockey and soccer and some other sports like that. It's where they have the 3 stars after a game, and third star is kind of like the third most important, second star second most important, first star is first more important. And so I think that's just going to be a good way to kind of look back on series and give some recognition to some of the players. So here are my 3 stars from Ole Miss's series sweep of LSU this weekend. First star is going to go to Will Furness, the first baseman. He hasn't really found that long ball home run hitting power that he had last year. I believe he had 12 home runs last year. This year he's only at like 2 or 3. But looking at his stat line, he was 6 of 10 at the plate with 3 runs scored, 5 RBIs, a double, 2 walks, and only 1 strikeout. And, we talk about it all the time. Ole Miss, what do? They hit home runs and they strike out. So that's a pretty good stat line. Only 1 strikeout plus the 2 walks. And then really there's only one other batter that kind of had a better weekend than Will did. And I know Will actually had one of those kind of clutch hits where it came through. I think it was a bases loaded situation over the weekend as well. So that's our third star. Our second star, I'm going to cheat a little bit. And I can do that because I make the rules for this. So we're just going to lump all 3 of the Ole Miss starting pitchers in together and call them our second star. Hunter Elliott, Cade Townsend, and Taylor Rabe. I think they all had great weekends. They each went 6 innings, which is should be a quality start. I believe an official quality start is 7, but you'll take a 6-inning start from your pitchers every time. And they gave up 16 total combined hits. Let's see here, 6 earned runs. They had 16 plus 5 is 21 total strikeouts and 3 combined walks. That is a great, I think any baseball coach would take that from their weekend starters. So those are your second stars. Our first star goes to Owen Pano, who you wouldn't, if we had tried to make predictions on who the stars would be, he probably wouldn't have been one. But he definitely deserves it. He had a great, he's kind of been quiet this season, hasn't really been in a whole lot, but that should be changing real soon. He went 5 for 12 this weekend with a double, 2 home runs, 8 RBIs, and he led the Rebels in total bases. And after the Saturday and Sunday games, Mike Bianco was asked about him, or actually no, it was the Friday and Saturday games. Mike Bianco was asked about him specifically, and the Ole Miss coach had a lot of good and great things to say about him, for good reason as well. So that Owen's going to be our first start for this. As happens every Monday, we got new top 25 rankings from D1baseball.com that covers Division 1 baseball. And we also got Baseball America's top 25, updated top 25 as well. And, we usually, if we're going to put a number in front of a team's name, we kind of go by the D1 baseball poll. So that's when we say Ole Miss is ranked, that's kind of the poll that most people are talking about, but there's 4 or 5 polls. So really, it's kind of more of just RPI is probably more important, but we'll talk about that too in a second. But so for the first time this season, Ole Miss is ranked in consecutive weeks at number 25 in the Division 1 baseball poll, or the D1baseball.com poll, and they got back into the Baseball America poll, coming in at number 24 after not getting back in last week. This kind of ties back into the whole SEC standings thing, and just that craziness in that middle cluster is you can make the argument, that Ole Miss should be a little bit higher. Maybe they'll have a chance to really make a statement with that this week when they play Southern Miss, who's ranked number 22 in the D1baseball.com poll. But 25 seems 25, 20, in those late 20s, that seems about right. That seems about right for where Ole Miss is at right now. Obviously there's a month left of the season, so they could definitely change, and I definitely would expect it to. Now, like I said, RPI is probably a little bit more important, and that's usually kind of more in line with what the selection committee goes by to determine who, it's at large bids for the NCAA tournament. And also, if you're in the top 16 of the RPI, you're generally considered in position to host an NCAA regional, which, and here's another little feather in the cap for the Rebels versus the Mississippi State, is that Ole Miss is number 13 in the RPI, so right in there with amongst the regional host. And Mississippi State, you got to scroll a little bit, is at number 21. I think that is very interesting to note. And just as interesting, Georgia, who was number 4 in the country last week, and I think they're now at what are they at? They fell 1 spot to 5 after losing this weekend. So that's just something right in front of Georgia is Kentucky. You got Missouri State all the way up there at number 16 in the RPI. Now, wouldn't that be something if Missouri State of all teams ends up hosting a regional? It's not as surprising to see someone like a Coastal Carolina up there, or Oregon State. I mean, they're in the national powerhouse conversation for college baseball teams these days. So I think Ole Miss is overall. So I guess the point of all of this is Ole Miss is in a good position. Have they looked great. Have they looked like the best team in the country? At times, maybe. There may be a game that I just can't think of where the pitching and the hitting was all there together at once. And I think if we see those types of games, that definitely puts Ole Miss, they could beat anybody when they're at their best. And I guess you could say that about a lot of teams. What, 23 is Liberty? Okay. 23 in the RPI, Liberty. 25-10. That's 2 spots behind Miss. Anyways, yeah. So it's squirrel. Anyway, so focusing up, we're gonna wrap this up and. Oh, and one last thing before we wrap it up. Tonight is the WNBA Draft. It's at 6 o'clock on ESPN. We are expected to hear Cody McMahon's name called at some point in the first round. It really depends on what mock draft you look at. If you just go look at the ESPN one, she's been she's been a first round pick in the last few of them. I think in the most recent one, she is projected at number 11 to the Washington Mystics, which is just a 2-spot difference than last week when the same ESPN columnist had her at number 9 to the Mystics. So, and one other reason to stick around, or at least keep tabs on the WNBA draft tonight, is that we might hear 3 players from Ole Miss get drafted. In addition to Cody McMahon, you got Latasha Lattimore and Christina Walla. I think, hey, that's a great thing, and keeping in mind, like we said last time, with it being the transfer portal season, that's a great sales pitch to have for Coach O to go out there and sell Ole Miss on. So, but again, that starts at 6 o'clock tonight with the first round on ESPN, and yeah, this has been the Outside Noise. We're going to call it a day right there. I'm Taylor Hodges with HottyToddy.com. Hope you have a safe and enjoyable Monday, and hopefully don't have too big of Monday blues. I know it's Monday, but hey, the weeks go by really quick, and there will be another SEC baseball series here before you know it.